Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast coming to you at the end. It's officially the end of the NFL season. Well, I don't know if it's technically the end. It certainly feels like the end because I know the league season doesn't end until like the second week of March or whatever. But certainly the last big event of the 2025 NFL season has come and gone with the Super Bowl. And don't worry, we will, of course, be going into that in, I want to say depth, but there wasn't really a lot to discuss, if we're being honest about the game. But don't worry, we will be getting into that and some of the details and the aftermath of it moving forward. But before we do that, we need to do the admin, which is as simple as saying thank you very much for joining us. Don't forget, you are watching or listening to this on YouTube. Feel free to give us a like, give us a subscribe, hit the bell icon, leave a comment, do everything that you need to do to help us grow this show, grow this platform, and just grow our social medias. Our social medias, by the way, are at Baldwin Sports Media on Instagram and TikTok, and on Twitter we are at MRB Sports Media. So give us a like or a follow or whatever the correct terminology is on each of them. And don't forget, if you are a returning listener, then as always, my continued thanks go out to you for continuing to support this work. And with that, we move on to the Super Bowl. Anyone who listens to this podcast on a regular basis knows I usually start with off the field stuff first, then move on to the actual games. But it's the Super Bowl. I think we kind of need to go the other way around this. And as I said, not really a lot to get into because it was not the most entertaining of games. I think that's the correct term. It wasn't the most entertaining of games. It was certainly a good game. I can understand why some people may be a bit annoyed with how it went. It wasn't exactly thrilling, especially after what happened, or what we've seen in the past couple of years. It was defensive struggle, whatever. Now, for the neutral or someone who may be not really that into American football, the people who are just there for the party, for the Super Bowl parties or whatever, then yeah, I can understand why it wasn't a good game. For me though, I actually quite enjoyed it. Yes, it wasn't high scoring, but I appreciated good defense. And it was good defense on both sides, and you were looking at it wondering, okay, what's going to come next? Where's the big play going to come from to break the game wide open? Is it going to continue to be a grind? There were some positive elements, even if the score wasn't exactly, you know, if the show wasn't exactly a barn burner, shall we say. I thought the Seattle Seahawks, I think overall showed why they are, the best team in the league. There are some arguments can be said, is the Super Bowl winner really the best team? Like you go back to the Giants teams that beat the Patriots. When you go into the game 17-0 and you lose, does that mean the Giants were the better team? No, I don't think it does. The Patriots were the better team. The Giants were just better on the day, I feel. I think that certainly wasn't the case with the Seattle Seahawks. Their defense was fantastic, and I think defensive coordinator Aiden Derd needs a lot of credit for what he did in scheming up, and Mike McDonald as well because he's a defensive side of the ball guy. So both of them in tandem coming up with a brilliant game plan to stop the Patriots and just exploiting the Patriots and their weakness. I made my notes here. Seattle defense great was just the first point I made. I don't think that's really a hot take of anything. But you can have a great defense, but you need to know how to utilize it and take away the opponent's strengths and take advantage of their weaknesses. And the Seattle Seahawks certainly did a lot of that, especially on the left hand side of the line. I don't want to say the left guard and left tackle. I don't want to say they were maybe overwhelmed in the big moment. Yes, they were rookies, but they've played 3 playoff games beforehand and they've been primary starters for the majority of the season. This wasn't like they were, someone was thrown in the last minute because there was an injury, someone got injured in the warm ups. These are, at least in the terms of the season, experienced players. And, they got found out in that situation. But again, they've had other games. Why weren't the Texans defense or the Chargers defense? Players, defenses who have good players on them. Why didn't they exploit the left-hand side? Why didn't the Broncos exploit the left-hand side of the Patriots offensive line the way that the Seattle Seahawks did? So a lot of credit needs to go to the Seahawks for playing effectively the perfect game. Sam Darnold, I know there's been a lot of talk about him, and I still don't think this, at least this performance, puts him in the stratosphere of, oh, he's a big game quarterback, because his performance was not perfect. Yeah, it wasn't great. No one's looking back at that and saying that it's one of the great performances, even one of the, even one of the best performances in a Super Bowl of all time. There have certainly been, no, there's certainly been worse, but there is it really in the top 10, 15, 20 maybe of quarterback performances? No, I don't think so. But he did the job that he was asked to do. He managed the game. Kenneth Walker, rather, on the ground, absolutely thoroughly deserved MVP. I know there was some argument about whether you give it to someone on the defensive side of the ball. That argument could certainly be made, but no, Kenneth Walker very much deserving of the MVP consideration. And I think that's pretty much it. There wasn't really much controversy going on. Though that thing, a couple of years ago with the Chiefs and the Eagles, you had that questionable holding call on Juju Smith-Schuster that effectively gave the Chiefs the game. There's been controversies all the way through the season. It was a clean game, shall we say? I don't think anyone can really argue about that. I think, yeah, that's pretty much all you can say about the Super Bowl. I know it's quick. I know it's, but that's really all there was to talk about. Very quick. I was in bed by about 10:30, and I think a lot of people were very thankful for that. The halftime show, again, I said last week, not really my thing, not on a political basis, but it's just not my kind of music. That all it is. I don't have a problem with him performing. I thought the show was okay, not my kind of music, but fine. It was good. I think it was a good performance. I can see why a lot of people liked it. Commercials, me, I didn't really pay much attention to them. That's really it on the Super Bowl. Again, I wish there could be more to go into. I wish there could be more of a controversial point to talk about. But in terms of the game itself, that's pretty much all there was. Pretty straightforward game. Kudos to the Seahawks for not overthinking it and taking points early in the game, not going for it on stupid fourth downs. Being effective in that way and just taking the points. That's been a criticism for a lot of people and from me in the past couple of weeks. So I give them a lot of credit for that. Taking the smart choices and it showed. What if they'd have gone for a couple of fourth downs instead of kicking field goals? Then the Patriots are driving towards the end with a chance to win. They're not as desperate. Maybe they come up with something. So I think a very smart game plan all around, and an effective game plan all around from the Seattle Seahawks. And you look at them going forward, and that's where I'm going to make my next topic is what's it going to look like for them, and for both teams moving forward. As I have, I'll start with the losing team, with the Patriots, and then save the best till last, go for the winners. I think the New England Patriots are not. I think it's going to be very, very hard for them to get back to the Super Bowl. And I don't think it's through any fault of their own. They are a very good team. I don't think anyone's disputing that, but they did get a lot of luck this season. They played a third place schedule, from the previous season, from when they got the chance to rebound. Now they're going up and they have to play a first place schedule. That's one thing. That's just one easy thing sorted out. Now with a new schedule, they've got to go on the road to, the Jaguars, who certainly gave a couple of frights in the postseason. If they're going to stay the same, who knows? But that's going to be difficult. They've got to go to Chicago, go to Detroit, go to Seattle, go to Kansas City, and go to the Giants. In terms of road schedule, that is bloody tough. I think it needs to be said again. Part of it because they now have the AFC East, they have the first place schedule, so with that comes first place opponents. I think that's going to be very, very tough for them. And I think if you look at the playoffs, they had a lot of luck in the playoffs as well. Two bad performances from the Texans and from the Chargers and the Texans in the wild card and the divisional round respectively. So I got a bit of luck there. And then they had to play a backup quarterback in the AFC Championship game. And as Mike Florio was talking about on Pro Football Talk this morning, they got lucky with the weather that, when the bad weather came in, that slowed the game down, they had the lead. So a bit of luck, if the weather had been, half an hour earlier or half an hour later, would that have changed things? We don't know. But I think they got a lot of luck. And when you look at what's coming up next season, you have to assume the Kansas City Chiefs are going to be back and better than what they were this year. So they're not going to be as easy of a task as they may have been this year for them. So that's going to be, when they get into the playoffs, that's going to be pretty tough. And a lot of teams, are gonna be getting touch. Again, I just look at that schedule. Really, I'd be stunned if they get 10 wins, if I'm being honest. Again, this is nothing against the Patriots. They're a good team. But when you have that gauntlet to have to go through, pretty much again, just on the road, every game is a potential prime time Sunday night game. I feel bad for the schedulers having to do this. Against Kansas City Chiefs, that could be a very good game. Chargers, playoff rematch. Let's go with that. Jaguars, you know, if they're on the rise, that could be put in the late season and maybe flex that. Against the Bears on the rise, you wouldn't want that on Sunday night. The Lions on the road, you wouldn't want that on Sunday night. The Seahawks, Super Bowl rematch, you wouldn't want that on Sunday night. These are tough, tough games for the Patriots to have to overcome. So I don't think they're going to make 10 wins next season. I think it's going to be very, very tough for them. Now, again, if things fall right, if they get hot towards the end of the season, could they make a bit of a run? Sure. But I don't think it's as cut and dry as they were the best team in the AFC this season, or at least they came out of the AFC this season. That means they, instant favourites to come out of the AFC next year as well. I certainly do not think that is the case. I think it's going to be very, very tricky for them, as I keep saying. And then finally, the last team I get to talk about this season is the Seattle Seahawks. I think they're in a much better place than the Patriots. Again, just I think the NFC is going to look a little bit easier for them than the AFC is going to look for the Patriots. And again, just looking at their schedule, you look at what the games they have at home. Of course they have the NFC West. They play home and away, but really they've got to go on the road to the Eagles and the Broncos. But you look at the bigger games. The Patriots again. They've got a home. The Chargers and the Chiefs they have at home. The Bears they have at home. The Cowboys they have at home. The Giants, if we are meant to believe that John Harbaugh is going to turn the Giants around, they've got them at home. They've got a very favourable schedule. Now, this is in amongst a very tough NFC West, where we assume the Rams are going to be, sticking around and being good again. We assume the 49ers are going to be tough, and if they can sort their injury problems out and they can close that substation down, maybe they'll be maybe they'll be healthy the whole season. But apart from the NFC West, the rest of their schedule is pretty favourable. So I think they're in a very good position. And you look at the roster around them, very young, no real major contract concerns coming up that have to be addressed that could spoil the whole face of the franchise in the way that Dak Prescott. And as I kept saying, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons. You can't pay all three. One of them had to go, and it was Parsons. That's not really the case for the Seattle Seahawks. They've got a good roster there, and a good young roster there as well, that can take them forward. So I think if you were to ask me which is more likely to be back in the Super Bowl next year, I think the Seahawks would be them over the Patriots. Do I think they're going to emerge out of the NFC? No, I think there's a lot of good play in the NFC. I think you can see maybe the Chicago Bears taking a step forward, the Detroit Lions coming back. The Packers going to be very tough. Again, I think overall the NFC is going to be much more challenging, but of the two, I would put the Seahawks going back to the Super Bowl next year out of the two teams that reached Super Bowl this year. Right, and with the NFC West, we have to stay for our next topic where we go off the field for the bigger picture topics. And that's the news that the NFL has confirmed that they are going to play in Melbourne this season, and it's going to be the Rams and the 49ers. I mean, we knew that the Melbourne game was coming and whatever, but it always takes on a little bit of a different life when you actually hear the name and you hear the teams of what's going on and everything. So it's been announced that, as I said, it's going to be the Rams and Nines, and they're going to play in Melbourne. And the one thing that everyone has been questioning is when are they going to play? Because of the time difference and the sheer magnitude of the task that they are going to have, because it is a 19 hour time difference between them and Melbourne. So it's not like the games that are played in Europe. It's been established. It's 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. That's 2:30 or 3:30, a reasonable time in the in Europe for them to take place. Brazil to the East Coast for the for the game they've been playing in Brazil, it's relatively similar, so it's not that big of a change. But for 19 hours, there is a lot of logistics involved, and it's a 14 and a half hour, 15-hour flight as well. Now the reports are coming out today. Various reports, various sources are coming out that it's going to be taking place in week one, which I think is a bad move by the NFL because it is instantly going to put both teams at a disadvantage heading into week two, unless you are going to give them a bye week in week two, which I think would just be stupid. Now, there is precedence for, early bye weeks. I remember the Buccaneers and the Dolphins had to play, or were set to play a couple of years ago in week one, but then I think it was a tropical storm or a hurricane was hitting the region. So they said, okay, you guys have both got a bye week in week nine, I think it was. So we're gonna just hold the game off. You have your bye week then, and then just gonna reschedule in week nine. You just play. I think it was 16 games at that point, 16 games straight. So it's not totally uncommon, but given this scenario, there's if it's going to be week one, that means you are probably likely going to have to play it on the Friday because in place of the Brazil, the Brazil game that's on the Friday night, because that is the only way that is going to be fair. Now, I've been thinking long and hard about how they were going to make this happen. And I thought one way to make it fair was, have it in whenever. Because again, we've also got to factor in, because it's 19 hours and it's 19 hours, Melbourne is 19 hours ahead, you're effectively planning for the next day. So you can't really have it at, 8 o'clock or, Eastern time or, Eastern time, prime time in the US, because then you're on a Sunday, for instance. You can't make it the Sunday night game because then you're doing it in the middle of the afternoon on Monday, and then you got to get the Australians to take time off work, presumably, to go and do it. So I figured the best way this is going to happen is it's going to have to be week one. It's going to have to be the Friday to then give them the time to, the extra couple of days recovery to then play the following Sunday rather. That way the Australians get the game on a Saturday, reasonable time for everyone. Because the other alternative, before they announced this playing week one, was to make it fair on everyone, because what you'd have to do is, again, this is why I think they may be bitten off more than they can chew with the idea of going to Australia. But I felt the best course of action for them would have been play the game in week five, whatever. Maybe, playing in week five, and you just have to, no one is going to be happy with it. But playing it week five or week six or week seven, middle of the season, send them out to Australia, basically give them home games. So they both get home games against whoever. Fly them out that same, they'd have to fly out that same day, land in on, probably looking at the Tuesday. The recovery on the front end would be brutal to have to do it. But again, this scenario is, in my view, the best way. Have them play at whatever. Maybe have it on the Saturday, or the Sunday. Maybe do in such a way that it's play in Saturday in Australia, or have it on Sunday in Australia, but you can't because then you've got to focus with the Saturday with college football, all that sort of stuff. Maybe do it on the Friday. Fine, we may have to work around something with high schools, whatever. Do it on the Sunday, make it whatever. Work it out within that time frame. Maybe even make it the Thursday night game, and have it on Friday. But again, this is why there's no real safe answer to all of this. But play it whenever you end up playing it. If you have to break the rules for not playing on Saturdays because of college football, fine, whatever. Then have them fly back. Give each team their bye. So they play in week five, give them a bye week in week six. And then in week seven, have them play each other again. That way, no one is disadvantaged from the extra recovery time to play a team that hasn't had to fly all the way across the world. If you want to give them that extra time to recover, fine. Okay. Then you play each other again. So that way you don't have a situation where the 49ers, for instance, come back, they have their bye week, but they're still, because of the time difference, still adjusting whatever, going on when they go the next week to play the Packers, say. I don't know their schedule, but the Packers. Or the Seahawks when they go against the Bears, who are on a similar level of rest, or on a normal level of rest, say. Have them play each other. So you go Rams hosting the Niners in Melbourne, week 5, say. Bye week in week 6, then the Niners host the Rams in week 7. That way, everyone is fairly treated. I think that would be the best way to make it happen because, again, if they're planning on doing this in week 1, again, forget the issues of when they're going to schedule the first game or whatever. Then you're going to have to get everyone back, and you can't give them a bye week 2. I think that's really unfair. If you want to, fine, but I just think that's a bit unfair to have the bye week in week 2. So that's why I think, maybe this is going to be the experiment. I know a lot of the players have said they think it's a bit too far. I think it's, again, logistically, maybe a bit weird and a bit tricky for them, but use this as a litmus test, see what the assessment is, and then next season just go full on, okay, this is what we learned, this is what we know we can get away with. If we're going to go to Melbourne again, or, Perth or wherever in Australia, give a game to Sydney, give a game to, where else is Queensland, go to New Zealand, go to Auckland, whatever. Whatever happens, we're going to use this as the beta test. So I think this one may be very, very weird, but it's going to tell us a lot of how they plan to handle it in years moving forward. But that's just my take. What do you think? How do you think the NFL should handle the Rams and the Niners having to play in Melbourne, supposedly in week 1? Do you think that's fair, or do you think it should be towards the end of the season, or do you think it should be in the middle of the season and use my bye rematch scenario? Let me know what you think. So that's really all there is to talk about. The Super Bowl dominated most of the headlines. I just want to say I can't remember if I talked about it last week. I believe I did, but if I didn't, I'll talk about it now. Clint Kubiak going to the Raiders as the head coach. That's now been confirmed, official. Smart move. I'm not going to say if anyone can turn around the Raiders, he can, but I think that's a pretty good shot. Offensive mind, work with Fernando Mendoza, we believe is going to be the case. See what you can do with that offense with a very good quarterback, AFC West. See what happens. But I like the idea of the move, so good for them. So now we need to turn to the off-field match, because again, Super Bowl week took away so much. There's plenty of other stuff to talk about, but really nothing of major importance going on around the league. So I'll just wrap this up with my usual final piece, and I wanted to talk about this for a while, and this is just how this came up. So you may have seen it on your social medias, you may not, but this comes from the world of soccer. But there is a fan out there called the United Strand. There's he's on social media under the name the United Strand, and basically he's been growing his hair out for 493 days, I believe is the final total. I say final total, you see why I chuckle at that in a second. But basically, he said he's not going to cut his hair until Manchester United win 5 games in a row. And they've been, 5 games in a row is very difficult to do, especially when you're in the Premier League, which is one of the most competitive leagues in the world in the sport. And then when you factor in the European competition and other competitions they have to play as well, to win 5 games in a row is tough. But Manchester United won their last 4 games, including some very tricky games against Manchester City and Arsenal, the 2 teams who are going for the title in the league. So for them to knock off them during this run, fantastic. It started with a run, beat Manchester City 2-0, then went away to Arsenal and won 3-2. But besides the point, then they won their next game against Fulham, then against Tottenham, they won it 2-0. So basically, it was all set. They won the 4 games in a row. Then they go on the road to West Ham, who are struggling in the league, and they only come out with a 1-1 draw. Now, all over social media in the day leading up to it, was asked in press conferences, it was everywhere, was a lot of talk of, what do you feel about this Man United fan that's not cutting his hair until they win 5 games in a row. And now the clock is restarting because they drew. And again, he's been doing this for 493 days. This has been going on for a while. And now he has to start again. Now, I know there's been some good coming out of it. He's raising money for charity as a result of it. There was like a live stream for the 5th game where people thought, watch along and they get his thoughts and everything. brilliant, raise money for charity, excellent. But I really wonder what's going to happen next time because there's been a bit of a following now. Is the story going to be, drifting away? For some people, do they really care? Is it really going to, or is he just going to have to go the rest of his life not cutting his hair? I'm just so fascinated by it. Just going to go check it out. The whole story is fantastic. And I urge you to. But that is it for the end of the show. Now, with it being the end of the season, I do intend to still do this either weekly or bi weekly. I do intend to keep doing this. Obviously, things got messy last year because I had intended to come back and do it bi weekly, but then my child was born, and that. I'm not saying I underestimated how much it takes to raise a child, but I underestimated it. I underestimated how much free time I would have, especially in the early days. So that's why I sort of didn't do a podcast from I think it was like April till September. But my intention is to keep doing this as often as I can, as regular as I can. Whenever big news comes out, compile, maybe do it bi-weekly, heading up to the draft and the combine, still cover the major events, the major talking points, because there will be some. I know there'll be big trades going on. If the Raiders do decide to trade away the number one pick for a King's ransom, then obviously I will want to talk about that. But it's going to have to be a player by ear situation. I just want to be upfront and straight with you about that right now. But we'll see what happens. But for now, that is it. I want to thank you, as always. Thank you very much for listening. Don't forget, you are watching this or listening on YouTube. So like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, leave a comment, do everything you can. Don't forget to follow us on our other social medias. We are at Border Sports Media on Instagram and TikTok, and at MRB Sports Media on Twitter. So check us out on them. If you are new or if you are a returning listener, as always, thank you so much for listening. And if you are a returning listener, then thank you so much for everything you've given and your listen throughout the whole of the season. That is it. I will speak to you when I speak to you next. When who knows what the big story is, but it certainly won't be about any games. So take care. I'll speak to you soon. And as always, stay safe.